Thanks, Kaz. Thanks everyone for tuning in. So yeah, my name's Nick Quantrill. I'm a crime writer from Hull. I write the Joe Garrity series of novels. Joe's a small-time private investigator who operates from his office in the old town of my home city of Hull. And I wrote 3 novels featuring him earlier on in the decade. Broken Dreams, The Late Greats, and The Crooked Beat. And I kind of thought that was a trilogy and that was done. I was kind of moving on to new characters and I wrote different novels, different ideas. And when the novel rights reverted back to me from Caffeine Night's original publishers, I kind of didn't know what to do with them. So Fahrenheit Press kindly took them off my hands and put them back out with new covers. And part of the deal was to write a new Joe Garrity novel. So The Sound of the Sinners, which is I have a copy of here, if I can find it in the camera. There we are, Sound of the Sinners. This is effectively the 4th in the Joe Garrity series, and it was published in August. But it's kind of like the start of a new story cycle as well, so it's kind of a good jumping point for people who maybe haven't read him before. So yeah, that's kind of an overview of where I am as a writer. Plus, I also co-direct the Hull Noir Crime Writing Festival, which runs again next March, and stuff like that. So yeah, that's me.
I like Joe. He's a great character.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to write a police character. I kind of wrote an unpublished novel first. Like most writers, I've kind of got one in my drawer that should never be seen again. And I kind of thought, if you write a police character, you've got to write something really different and really original, haven't you, to kind of capture the imagination, because there's so many good writers of cop novels out there. And I didn't kind of feel like I'd done it myself. So I kind of went back to the drawing board and thought, what could I do instead of a police detective? And that's when the idea of a private detective became sort of to my mind, because I thought I can sidestep the research, which is brilliant, and I can kind of take that American idea of a PI, put him into a northern city in the UK, and try and do something that you don't see done very often. So that kind of became the challenge to myself to write a private investigator.
It's great. I'm on Joe 1 at the moment. I'm about halfway through.
Thank you.
And I'm intrigued by the odd bits of Hull lingo that peek in.
Yeah.
Do you ever get questioned about it? Like he's attacked in a 10-foot.
Yeah, I do. I remember when I first sent it to Caffeine Nights, it was almost like translation. They were sending messages back saying, "What's a 10-foot? What's a patty?" And it's just kind of like I wanted to use just those bits of local colour. Essentially, that's what they are. If I know to maybe some of the viewers tonight, they'll be thinking about they have alleyways in Ginnells, but in Hull we call them 10-foot. So it just became obvious to me that I was going to call them 10-foots in the novel. So yeah, it's just kind of local language, I suppose. But yeah, I didn't want to go too overboard with it or write in the vernacular, because I think that's when it becomes tricky to understand and follow. So yeah, they're just like there's a sprinkling of Hullisms in there, I think. But if I was a reader, I'd probably expect that in other people's novels when I read about alleyways and Ginnells and stuff. It's just, if we get into the whole bread cake debate, things like that, people have their own words for these things, and it just felt more authentic that I would use those words.
Yeah, you can Google them as well, can't you?
Yeah. And and if you're reading the book and you can see that he's running behind a building or down the side of a building, you kind of, in your own mind, you picture it, don't you? So I think, you might not call it 10-foot, but I think as a reader you would understand what it is, like I would with other words.
Yeah. We got some questions before we went live.
Yeah, we did.
We got a few, didn't we? We got one from Sarah saying, "Do you regret supporting the wrong team?"
Yeah, I think what Sarah was alluding to is rugby league. In the book, Joe Garrity is a former Hull Kingston Rovers player, which I did because I wanted to root him in the city. And when people think about Hull, traditionally people think of Fish, Rugby League, and John Prescott. That's sort of the holy trinity of Hull, I think, until we got all cultured a few years ago. So I wanted to make him a rugby league player, just to give him that past in the city where people might recognise him, people might know who he is, just something that kind of grounds him in something that's important to Hull. So it kind of became, when I decided to do that, it became obvious to me that he was going to play for the team that I support, and that's Hull Kingston Rovers, which in my eyes is the premier team in the city, of course, when it comes to rugby league. But Sarah strongly disagrees with me on that and supports Hull FC. But it kind of something that started off essentially it's kind of fun and tying him into sport, which is something I love. It also became a really interesting kind of tool for exploring the city as well, because in the past, for people who don't know, Hull's kind of divided down the middle by a river. And on one side of the river, it was Hull FC, and the other side was Hull Kingston Rovers, and it was kind of based around where people did the jobs and the communities they lived in. So if you was one of the trawlermen and you lived in the Old Hessel Road area, then you would support Hull FC because their ground boulevard was based right in the middle of it. It was the heart of the area. And then I kind of came to realise that as those, what we kind of call now the slum housing, was pulled down and people were rehomed around the city, those breakdowns in the city between just east and west of the river are completely gone. You know, you can kind of go to the east of the city in what might have been one team's territory 50, 60 years ago, and it's completely gone now. And it's a really interesting way of looking at social change in a place, I found, through using sport, and it was kind of a bit of a surprise to me as well, that. But plus, of course, you know, if I've got him as a rugby league player, I can kind of have him walking into pubs in the wrong side of town and feeling a little bit on edge and in danger, and it's good fun.
Yeah, Leeds is quite similar. If you were south of the river, you'd be one team, and I think it's quite a northern city thing.
Yeah, especially if you've got a city where you have two sporting teams, you have a great kind of rivalry that you can draw on straight away there, and that's something that impacts on lots of people's lives, isn't it? It's always there, and it's always in the background, it's always bubbling along, so there's always the chance to kind of insert a little bit of colour into the backdrop of the novel by using things like that, I think. And you know, when you're writing about any place, you have to look for what makes it unique and what gives you an advantage in terms of telling that story. You know, and that for me, that's one of the things that defines Hull, really, is sport, and how those barriers have broken down in the last sort of 50, 60 years.
Do you ever have to explain rugby league to like other readers, sort of away from the north? Because it is a distinctly kind of northern sport.
It is a very sort of distinct northern. I mean, Joe is a former rugby league player, but that's kind of all people really need to know. To be fair, that I know if you kind of follow the sport, you know, and I kind of refer to him as being a former scrum half, and you can picture him as being quite a small man. He's quite wiry, he's quite lean, because then that's a position in rugby league where you need to be kind of fast and be able to kind of move around quickly. But you know, no, there's no kind of like lengthy essays in the book about the value of rugby league or his playing career or anything like that. It's just there kind of as a bit of a backdrop blank for him, really.
And the only other question we got before we went live was another one about Hull. It was someone said in the early 80s, it was common for sixth form teachers to advise students to put Hull University last on their UCAS form.
Right. Yeah, I did see that question.
They said, have you heard of this before, and what's your opinion?
Yeah, no, I've not heard of that before, because I was brought up in Hull in the 80s. I was a child in the 80s, so you know, that was a bit before my time in that sense. But I think Hull in the 80s was a really kind of tough city. You know, it was kind of coming off the back of the death of the fishing industry, you know, something that had defined it and sustained it for centuries, effectively, through whaling and into motorised boats and the Arctic kind of boats that went out to Iceland. So, you know, it was a city in the 80s that I think was looking for an identity, and it didn't have one, essentially. You know, it kind of lost what made it proud and what made it tick. And I think in the 80s and maybe into the 90s, there was that kind of attitude of outsiders weren't particularly welcome. So, you know, maybe the person who asked the question has a point there, that maybe it didn't feel like a welcoming city back then. But, you know, I think as the city's grown more confident in itself, especially over the last 15, 20 years, with lots of new developments and the city of culture, it's a very vibrant city now, you know, and the students live all around the city instead of in like a little kind of enclave around the university itself. And, you know, it's a very kind of modern, multicultural city now. And I think, you know, that's reflected by the fact students come to it in huge numbers from around the world, and, you know, a lot of them tend to stay. So, you know, I think that kind of perception of Hull as it was is probably unfair, really. People still think that it's unfair, but it's also a city that you need to come to, isn't it? Because you don't just necessarily pass through. It's not like Leeds where, you know, you can pass through to any number of places through the train station, but with Hull you need a reason to come and visit us. So, you know, I think people often make kind of judgments about the place without necessarily having visited it.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm an outsider, and I like it as a city to visit.
Excellent.
Very friendly.
You can come again.
So before we go on to the questions on the stream, how did you go about founding Hull Noir?
Well, Hull Noir, it was to do with the City of Culture. When Hull got shortlisted for the 2017 festivities, myself and kind of everybody else who worked within the sort of like the art scene in the city, doing whatever it was, whether it's theatre, writing, acting, whatever it was, was invited to go along to an open meeting and just kind of pitch ideas that would go into the bid pack. And I went along and I just kind of said a crime festival without really kind of knowing what it would be or what it would involve. And then Hull won, so it became a little bit more serious. It was a case of, right, how do we actually do this? And I was very lucky that I teamed up with particularly Nick Quantrill, who's the writer of the Ted Lewis biography. And Ted Lewis, people probably don't know the name Ted Lewis, but he's a massively important crime writer who wrote a novel called Jack Should Stay at Home in 1969, which kind of took that American hard-boiled PI type of idea, but put it into a northern setting. And it's kind of like one of those kind of like founding building blocks of contemporary crime fiction. But not many people know the book until you say that it was filmed as Get Carter, starring Michael Caine. But nobody really knew Ted's story other than the fact he was kind of brought up in the Humber region. He came across the Hull to go to the art school in the late 50s. And Nick Quantrill was writing his biography. So we kind of ended up teaming up because we knew we had this kind of story to tell people that they hadn't heard before. Nobody really knew what Ted had done in his life. And it kind of turned out that, as well as writing the novel behind Get Carter, he'd worked with the Beatles, he'd worked for Doctor Who, he'd written for Z-Cars, he'd done all these amazing things before dying tragically young from alcohol. So we knew we had a great story to tell as a festival. We knew we could hook it around this idea of Ted Lewis and Get Carter. And we was very lucky that we got the funding to do it as part of the official programme. So we had a full weekend at the back end of 2017, and we brought writers like Martina Cole, Mark Billingham, John Connolly, and about 40 others to the city. We had a brilliant weekend talking crime in one of the hotels in the city centre. And we just wanted to keep doing it. And we struggled to get the funding like a lot of people in this city did afterwards, because it was kind of felt like Hull had its 5 minutes in the spotlight, so it was somebody else's turn to get the funding. But we plugged away and we managed to get the funding again to do it this year. And we were due to run in June, but obviously the pandemic meant that wasn't going to happen. So we've rescheduled for next March now, and we kind of want to keep it as a fixture on the crime writing calendar, really, and kind of keep growing it as a festival, all being well. But yes, it's certainly been a steep learning curve, actually, from going from just being people who write novels to like put on an actual crime festival, and you've got to organise things like, is there enough chairs there? Have you got a stage to put the authors on, and all these kind of things that you think, oh, I didn't sign up for this a couple of years ago. It's absolutely crazy. But yeah, it's been a hugely rewarding kind of process as well.
You must increase your network of other authors as well that you can draw on and talk to.
Yeah. I think the big bonus when we did it was that the fact that myself and Nick had already been doing festivals. I was going to a lot of festivals either as an author to speak or to just kind of enjoy them. So I already knew a lot of the crime writing world in that sense, and I think that meant people trusted us. When we kind of got in touch and said we're putting on a crime festival, would you like to take part in it? I think people, because they knew who we were willing to take that chance that we would do it properly. Yeah, and it did. It really did increase our contacts. I certainly, myself, I found I've been more festivals since then. And I think Nick is the same. So, it's definitely been kind of like if you kind of break it down in that sense, it's been a good move to do it. But essentially, we did it because we wanted crime writing to be part of the City of Culture year. And we knew if we didn't do it, nobody would do it. So we just wanted to do it for that reason, essentially.
That's great. And it's there's a lot of nice venues that you could do it at in Hull, isn't there?
Yeah,
it's quite a compact city centre.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when we did it in 2017, we used the station hotel. So, if people know it, it's actually attached to the train station. It's got kind of like a proper Art Deco feel to it. So when we did it in late November, we had the Christmas trees were up and the decorations were up. It looked almost like an Agatha Christie type of novel waiting to happen in the main hall. It was amazing. So yeah, it really kind of fitted the vibe of what we wanted. And I think kind of the most rewarding thing, as well as it just actually happening and going ahead and nobody making a complete fool of themselves, was the fact so many people got in touch to say, we really enjoyed coming to Hull, because like we're saying, you need a reason to come, and people hadn't been before, and they came along and they enjoyed it. It was fantastic.
There's so many questions coming in on stream. I'm gonna ask you some of these. Samantha wants to know how much research you did to write Joe Geraghty as a PI.
Not a lot, because that was kind of why I sidestepped the option of police officers, because there's such pressure to get it right in it if you write a police character, I think, as well as the competition of being able to write them more kind of like a really kind of complex and three-dimensional character. So I wanted to, the Private Eye was kind of like a neat idea to sidestep that, but I think in reality, when I looked into it, the British private investigator, it's a very boring job. A lot of the time, they're essentially just serving paperwork and kind of working on very minor things. You know, there isn't really a culture of private investigations in this country like it is in America. So I've kind of used a lot, I suppose, a lot of artistic license to insert him into the middle of murders and blackmail and all sorts of stuff like that in the crime writing world. So yeah, it's kind of like, it's a nice combination of not being able to do too much research and just let your imagination run riot, because he's the kind of person who can knock on the door of somebody at the bottom of society and at the top of the society at the same time. You know, whether he gets through that door is a different question, but he answers to nobody and he kind of follows the story as he sees fit, and I like that.
He's not always the best at getting on with people either, is he? He's no.
No, I think that's kind of what fires a crime novel, isn't it? It's that sense of conflict and tension with people, and yeah, so he's quite willing to fall out with people because he's searching for the truth. Essentially, he's searching for the resolution. So if that means he crosses paths with people and he falls out with them, then so be it. But I hope, and I try and keep it so that when he gets punched in these novels, it tends to hurt him. He's not kind of like a superhero who just bounces back up again. It really sort of hurts physically. So. Yeah, he is kind of quite a cantankerous individual at times, I think. But, I think all kind of detectives of all stripes kind of need that drive, don't they, to really want to get to the truth and get answers for the right people. And, Joe's the same.
Joe Singleton asked, is there a particular book that got you into crime writing?
Yeah, there probably is. I mean, like a lot of crime writers, my journey started with Enid Blyton and the famous 5 novels. It's amazing how many crime writers, when you ask that question, they all say Enid Blyton. And I think it's just the joy of solving puzzles, isn't it? And being part of something. So yeah, I was a huge reader of the famous 5 novels as a really young child, and then I sort of progressed through to Sherlock Holmes as a teenager before I stopped reading them. I kind of probably from about 13 onwards, because everything at that point, life becomes a lot more interesting, doesn't it? And staying in your house reading books is really, really boring when you're a teenager. So I stopped reading for quite a number of years until I was into my 20s, really. And what got me kind of reading properly and into crime, I suppose, in this sense, was some Ian Rankin novels on my dad's bookshelf. I just kind of plucked them off and I read them, and I just thought they were amazing. The way that Ian writes about his city of Edinburgh, that was very much inspiration for wanting to write about Hull, really. It made me kind of realise that I could write about where I live. If Ian could write about Edinburgh, then I could write about Hull. So yeah, Ian Rankin is probably a big inspiration, I think, and I would probably say still the gold standard for British crime writing, really, for me. I think he consistently is the top of the pile, and I'm looking forward to his new book for Christmas. Fingers crossed, if my mum's watching on the side.
William Shaw has got a question for you. He says, Sound of the Sinners is a Clash track and the title of Geraghty 4. Tell us about how music relates to your writing.
Yeah, that is right. It is a kind of slightly butchered Clash title, and the third Joe Geraghty book, The Crooked Beat, is also a Clash title. I just like song titles for book titles, essentially. And I just kind of like those 2 or 3 word, 4 word sort of like little phrases, really. But yeah, I mean, music, it probably doesn't impact me directly in terms of being a writer, but one of probably the big influence on me really was when I was in my 20s. I fell upon a local band in Hull called Lithium Joe, who people probably won't know them, but they were kind of active around the north of England for a while. But they released their own records on their own label, they booked their own tours around England and then out into Europe. Their attitude was basically, we're a Hull band, and we're going to do it on our own terms. And it was just really, really inspiring for me to meet people in kind of like a very kind of enclosed city where I didn't really know anything about the arts world or writing. I just had this kind of vague idea that I might want to do it. But the example that they set me was really the key one, essentially. They're kind of sort of showing me that if you want to do something, then you can just do it. So that was kind of, I suppose that's music is kind of more important to me as a person rather than as a writer in that sense, I think.
You made a soundtrack for the
Mm,
Geraghty 4 book, didn't you?
I
Now,
did.
when I think of Hull,
Mm,
apart from like Rugby and John Prescott and
and finish.
things like that, I always think of music because there's so many famous bands and artists from Hull.
Yeah, I think that's kind of part of the isolation of the city is that it gives people permission to do what they want to do. Because we're not looking to London for trend or other big cities for kind of what's going on there. People do what they want to do, and that's kind of reflected in the art scene. I think particularly in music, like obviously people like Paul Heaton came to the city as a student and formed the House Martins, but he did it in his own way. They started off by busking around the city and just kind of like learning the hard way. Especially like we were talking earlier about what the city was like in the 80s. Paul Heaton was right in the middle of it at that stage. He was probably provocative, I would imagine. But yeah, I think the music scene in Hull is incredibly vibrant at the moment, and there's like lots of really interesting grime artists appearing. All these kind of like different things that you maybe wouldn't expect in a city like Hull. But it's because I think people just feel that they can get on with the work in a place like Hull because nobody's really watching or judging them in a way that there might be in other bigger cities like London. So people just get on with it, and eventually some of it leaked outwards, I suppose. And I think that if you're good enough, then people will give you a chance. And we're seeing that, and not in music, also in other arts. There's writers like Vicky Foster, who's a poet, but she's having lots of work put on the BBC at the moment. There's lots of interesting things going on, and people are starting to sort of slowly break out the city doing it, I think. So, and the important thing is they're doing it on their own terms and in their own way.
Joe Singleton has actually commented with something like that. He says the thing he loves about British crime is authors basing their books on places they know well and that we, the reader, can relate to.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. As a writer, that feels like the only choice to me. I want to write about the cities. As much as the novels are about Joe Geraghty, they're also about me kind of exploring the city in my own head, really, and trying to make sense of it to myself, really. And what those books represent is my truth of my home city, really. But as a reader, absolutely, I love British crime fiction that takes me to a place and really kind of makes me feel like I'm there walking the streets with the author. So, people like Ian Rankin again. I know we had William Shaw mentioning it. His series set in the sort of the southeast. My geography is not so good down there. I love the Joe Faraday series by Graham Helly in Portsmouth. Very kind of provincial cities, but really kind of cities with their own character and their own way of doing things. And yeah, as a reader, I love that as well.
I like the ones where they reflect the city as it is as well. So you give like a really real impression of Hull, like the good and the bad. And I think that's nice because it actually transports you to what the city is really like.
Yeah, I think it's important, isn't it, to just tell your truth, essentially. My mum always says to me, when am I going to write something nice about Hull? And I think I do at times. But like with The Sound of the Sinners, one of the things I wanted to talk about was what it's like now the city of culture's left. Who's won from this process, who's lost from it. So like a lot of the action is set around the fruit market, which has gone from being a derelict warehouse region to being, and it's been described as a mini Shoreditch, hasn't it? Because it's got all these kind of like little microbreweries popping up and fancy bars and designer clothes shops, that type of thing. And I just think, people have certainly won from the process and people have certainly lost. And what those books represent is just my perception of that and my truth of that. So I'm not going to be kind of like sugarcoat it and say Hull is amazing all the way through. But equally, I'm not going to kind of do the opposite as well. So, I hope those books kind of will stand the test of time to a degree, in the sense that maybe if my daughter was to pick them up in 30 years' time, she will get an honest perception of what Hull was like when she was being born. Something I would hope.
Luca Veste wants to know: did you write stories as a kid? And if so, we've got all the authors tonight watching you. And if so, what was your very first one about?
I didn't write as a child, and I think that was partly because being an 80s child in Hull, it didn't feel like there was any kind of value in the arts. My parents always encouraged me to do well at school. They always encouraged me to do well in sport. But the arts was not something that people in Hull did, or certainly not people like we did in Hull, I don't think. So no, I never wrote as a child, never. So the first short story I wrote was as an adult, essentially. I must have done some writing at school, I suppose, but I was always a massive reader, but I never thought I could be a writer. It was one of those strange things where other people for writers, not people from Hull writers. So no, it wasn't really a kind of a burning desire I've had from being a child. It's something that's crept upon me in that sense.
What inspired you to take the leap into writing then?
I did a degree with the Open University in my late 20s, and I think at that stage in my life, I was working a full-time job in an office, and I was just kind of drifting along without any real purpose or any real motivation. But that degree kind of kicked me back into life. It probably helps that I was studying social policy and criminology, which is I was kind of studying things in textbooks that I was reading in those Ian Rankin novels at the same time. And that was kind of very striking to me, that you could present very dry information and theory in a thrilling novel at the same time. What I was reading was the same essentially, but Ian was doing it in a far more accessible and entertaining way, and that kind of really struck me. So as I came to the end of doing the degree, which took me 6 years on a night, I suddenly had all this time on my hands again, and I suddenly felt I had all this motivation and energy, and I wanted to do something. So I just wrote a short story, and then I wrote another short story, and a bit later I was writing slightly longer short stories. And before I knew it, I was thinking I might write a novel now. And it's kind of like an addiction, I suppose, but a relatively safe addiction, hopefully. It's not probably worse addictions to have, isn't there? Some days I'm not so sure, but it becomes an addiction and a habit and something that you just got to do. And I've been lucky to be published along the way in that sense. So yeah, I think it was really the Open University. I'd really have to kind of credit them as being the major driver in becoming a writer. It was nothing I actually learned as such, but it was just that sense of doing things again and just feeling alive and wanting to sort of like do something sort of very productive again. And that's what it kicked into me.
What inspires the plots then? Do they kind of arrive fully formed, or do you just get like a little germ of an idea and they develop as you go?
Yeah, I'm trying to be more of a planner as I write, because in the previous novels I've spent a lot of time writing stuff and then deleted it and kind of going down dead ends and having to start over again. So I think novels always for me tend to start with a germ of an idea. Like with The Sound of the Sinners, I had a bit more of a framework because I'd had a gap between book 3 and this new one, where Joe Garrity had been out of Hull for the last 5 years. So I had to start to think, why would he come back to Hull? What would bring him back? What would be a strong enough reason for him to want to return to the city that he's walked away from? So straight away, I kind of knew I had to have some crime that would bring him back in. And in this case, it's the death of his former business partner and his mentor, who gets killed in a hit and run incident just outside of Hull, which the police are quite happy to write off as an accident. But obviously, Joe's not so keen to do that. So he comes back to investigate himself. So that became kind of the starting point of the novel. And I knew I had to connect to a crime in the past as well. So I kind of had a framework for the new one, but often I tend to be a bit of a hoarder of ideas. I'll kind of save a lot of stories off the internet or newspaper cuttings. And every now and again, one of them will just kind of leap out. And it's often just a very small thing. But once you start kind of exploring an idea and you start to think of who would kind of maybe benefit from somebody's death, or who would oppose this piece of information coming out, you start to build the whole world around it of characters. And for me, a lot of the time, I'm just kind of mapping out ideas and characters and things which don't connect together, but then every now and again, I'll just kind of find something that does. So it's kind of almost a case for me of chucking an awful lot of stuff at the wall and seeing what really makes sense. Like ideas are quite easy to have, but finding those ideas that can sustain 90,000 words in a novel, that's kind of a lot trickier. So I tend to think the more I put into it, the bigger chance I've got of finding something out at the end of it.
So I ask a lot of authors this who write a series, do you keep a character Bible of your characters, like all the details about them?
I kind of wish I did, actually. I don't, but I tend to think with the Garrity novels, it's a relatively small cast of central characters. I suppose there's Joe and his 2 business partners, so kind of around that I can kind of weave characters in and out. But yes, I think in a lot of respects, keeping a character Bible would have been a big help, really, because I certainly know plenty of other authors who say, I wish I'd started at the beginning and kept like a list of people and what they look like and how old they are and all those type of details. So yeah, I mean, sometimes you have to dig back and think, Christ, how old did I make that character, or what colour eyes might I have if I've described the colour of eyes at some point. So yeah, it can be a bit of a challenge, but yeah, I think I've been quite lucky that I've worked with a fairly limited number of characters in those books, in a sense, in the core of those books. So it's not been too much of an issue yet, but I should maybe start doing that, I think, or train my daughter to do it for me or something. My cat, anybody.
Would you expand your writing outside of Hull, maybe into other areas around the Humber?
Yeah, the narrative books do kind of stray outside the city boundaries a little bit. And the book I'm writing at the moment kind of edges into Leeds a little bit and around the world, and it's kind of covering a bit more of a geographical spread. And I think probably part of that was confidence. You know, when I was writing those kind of Garrity novels, I was kind of learning to write at the same time, I suppose, as well. And you know, as well as having this desire to write about my own city, it's kind of, I suppose, it can be a comfort blanket. It can be a disadvantage as well, an advantage writing about your own city. So, you know, I think I've kind of needed time maybe to work up to the idea of writing about somewhere else. And you know, the novel I might write next probably will be outside of Hull. I think I want to challenge myself to do that. Where it'll be, I'm not quite so sure. It might be possibly London. I mean, Leeds is possibly ripened it for a detective series. Possibly, I'm not sure. There's many writers who are directly writing about Leeds as a city. So yeah, I think I'm ready to. I feel ready in myself that I want to write about somewhere different anyway. But I guess for me, Joe Garrity will always be my tool to write about Hull. You know, I've kind of always got to fall back on as a character now. I can always put me into different scenarios when I think Hull's got something that needs to be explored. So I've been very fortunate that when I wrote the first novel, Hull had just been crowned the UK Crap Town of the Year by some snotty magazine or book or whatever it was in the time. And by the time I finished the first 3 novels, we'd been crowned the UK City of Culture. So the city's been on an amazing journey as well as a backdrop to the novels. And The Sound of the Sinners explores it post City of Culture. So I guess as things change in the next year or so with Brexit, you know, Hull will change as well, and there'll be interesting things that come out of that, I suspect, for a port city. So, you know, I think I'll always write about Hull using Joe Garrity, but I may well explore other places and other ideas with different characters as well.
Would you ever be tempted to have like a visual tour somewhere, maybe on like your website or something of like Garrity's Hull? You know, like Peter May does the Hebrides.
That's been done actually in Hull. David Mark did it with his novels, with the project of Hull Libraries, Bed Pretty City. He did like a murder map of the city, and he did sort of various talks and events around it. And Val Wood, who writes historical sagas in the city, there's Val Wood trails around as well. So yeah, I mean, I guess I just want to write novels essentially. You know, it's the same with things like script writing. People say if your books were kind of to be put on television, would you write them yourself? And I don't think I'd want to. I just want to write novels and try and improve as a novelist. So things like that would be very nice, but I'd be much happier if somebody else did it for me, essentially. So yeah, I mean, I'm not adverse to kind of the idea of doing a Garrity tour. Whether there's enough demand for it, I don't know, but probably not. But you know, I think I'd leave that to the experts, really. Maybe one of the excellent historians who do guided tours around the city could do that. But yeah, I mean, I think when you write something set in a real place, and there is that kind of interest in it from people, because you can visualize it, and it would. I mean, I've done various blog posts where I've taken photographs of key locations in the books and things like that to try and give people a flavour. And I guess now we're back on lockdown, people have got a bit more time for things like that happening. So maybe I should sort of develop some photographs to do with a book, and maybe some film footage or something off my camera, and try and give a bit more insight that way, possibly.
Alex Shaw asked what you're writing or planning next.
I don't know. I won't, I'm not going to go into Alex territory of thrillers like he writes, which are really good. I actually wrote the end last night on a new novel, which is it's about a young female podcaster who stumbles into a story that kind of she's desperate. She's based in Hull, but she's desperate to leave. You know, she wants the world. She wants to change the world. So she kind of stumbles upon a story that gives her the chance to do that. So it's kind of a story that's set partly in Hull, but is really a very different character because she wants out of the city. And yeah, it's about kind of a murder of an undercover police officer 30 years ago, and who was responsible for it, and the reasons behind it, and illegal raves and all that type of thing. New age travelers are in there. So you know, I've really enjoyed writing that. I essentially wrote it over lockdown, I guess, from spring to now. So it's at the stage where I've got a final draft, and it goes from A to Z. But It's going to need a fair bit of work yet before it goes anywhere. So I'm not really thinking what I'm going to write next. I'm just thinking I need to get that edited into something like into shape for sending out. So I'm kind of. It was kind of interesting to write a non-Joe Garrity novel in that sense again, because the Joe novel's a first-person novel, so we see the whole world through Joe's perspective. Where with this novel I've just written, it's kind of a third-person novel told from 2 or 3 perspectives, so it was a bit more of a challenge for me as a writer as well. So yeah, I've really enjoyed the process of writing a different character, but I don't think I'll be able to leave Joe behind either. So maybe the next book might be another Joe Garrity novel once we see how next year kind of plays out in the city and the wider area.
And with your other hat on, how's the whole Noir planning going?
We're scheduled to go ahead next March as it stands. It will go ahead next March, one way or another. I suspect people can probably see which way the wind's blowing on that one at the moment. So I'm pretty sure it'll be an online festival in March because, yeah, I think we'll probably still be in some sort of lockdown scenario next March, I guess, won't we? So I think trying to put on a festival and ask people to come along to it and ask authors to come along to it, it's just too much, I think, at the moment, and people are rightly kind of prioritising health, aren't they, and kind of protecting everybody else. So I think it'll be an online festival, which, yeah, at first it was a little bit depressing because we're thinking, the idea of Hull Noir was to bring people to the city and have a gathering of like-minded people. And, as people know, crime festivals are great for that, aren't they? There's a great time to kind of catch up with friends and what's going on. But if we go online, it gives us a chance to maybe involve authors from further afield who we wouldn't have been able to attract in terms of getting them to travel into Hull. So it might change the feel of what we're doing a little bit. It gives us different opportunities to kind of work with. So yeah, we'll make a final decision, I think, certainly by the end of November, and let people know what's going to happen. But yeah, I think we're just kind of being positive about it in that we will do something, and we're going to make it as good as we can. And yeah, we'll try and go again post-pandemic and put on an actual physical event again, fingers crossed.
Alex also wanted to know, if you weren't writing crime fiction, what genre would you like to try?
Yeah, that's a good question, because as a reader, I would probably say 75 to 80% of what I read is crime novels. I'm a big kind of fan of crime as a reader as well as a writer, so I've kind of got no great edge to write in other genres, really. I guess if I was to write something else, it would probably be non-fiction. I would, as a big football fan or a music fan, I would probably try and do something around that. But I think in terms of fiction, I only want to write crime novels, really. I'd quite fancy writing a historical crime novel, possibly at one point, but I don't kind of have the urge to write in other genres like some authors are kind of fortunate enough to have. I just like crime writing, and I feel like that's where I want to kind of concentrate on and try and improve and do better with.
Samantha asked what it's been like being a writer in residence in various places.
Yeah, that's great fun. I mean, I've done it twice now. The first one was with Huffington Rovers, which was arranged by the publisher, actually. I think when I was published by Caffeine Night, the MD there just tried to get the books into the club shop, essentially, the link being the Joe Garrity being a former player. And by the end of the phone call, it turned into me going in there as a writer in residence, which was kind of like, what does one of them do? And it turns out that what they wanted me to do was work with them on the literacy program. So I went into some schools and did some creative writing with kids, which was great because you kind of reaching children who maybe wouldn't necessarily want to engage with writing, but when you do it through sport, they come alive because it's something they like themselves and something they love and understand. So I did that, and I also wrote a series of Joe Garrity short stories for the Matchday program, which became quite an interesting challenge because I couldn't obviously write crime stories for the Matchday program because it's read by a wide audience of people from probably 10 to 90 possibly into a program. So I kind of kept inventing these scenarios where maybe Joe was playing in a match or watching a match, and that would be the backdrop to him maybe doing a bit of surveillance work or something like that. It became an interesting kind of thing to do. And I maybe wrote about, I think I did 15 or 16 short stories over the year for the program. So yeah, it was really good fun working with Huffington Rovers. And after that, I was a writer in residence at the National Railway Museum in York, which was, again, it was a strange one, that one, because they was doing a season around Agatha Christie and the golden age of murder using some of those beautiful carriages they've got in the museum. So I would go in there on a Monday, once a month, and sit at these amazing old typewriters that they'd hired in to help people write short stories on and just talk about creative writing with them. But the reality was, the only people who came into the museum on a Monday morning were school kids. So I used to spend the day basically sat there trying to stop kids breaking the typewriters. It was like kind of like some kind of like Bash Street Kids type of scenario. I don't think I taught anybody anything about creative writing. I just had to become like an enforcer around these typewriters. But I mean, it was a really nice idea, and it was a lot of fun for me to go and read some Agatha Christie books and try and learn about and talk about it with people. But I think with hindsight, probably doing it on a Monday wasn't the best idea. Yeah, it's been a lot of writing resident. It kind of gives you some different opportunities that you wouldn't normally get. So I'm not sure what else I could be writing resident for now. Maybe football club this time. I'll try.
Yeah. Luca Beste says, "What's your favourite Beatles song and why?"
Oh, I know Luca's not a fan of the Beatles, isn't he? He's from Liverpool as well, and I suppose maybe they're a bit too overempowering in Liverpool, possibly. But trying to pick one, because they are my favourite band, so I would really struggle to pick one. I would probably cheat actually and pick Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane as a double A side. That's my favourite. So yeah, I want to go to Liverpool again and see all the Beatles stuff and see Luca.
Do you think that Luca doesn't like them because he's had to live with it for so long?
Yeah, I think so. And maybe that's kind of interesting as a writer. When you're writing about cities, like we're saying about how people get perceptions of cities, don't they? And the Beatles become Liverpool, don't they, to some people in the mind? And obviously, it's a massive tourism driver for a city like that, and Liverpool do really well with it. But I'd imagine if you're a resident there, it must get a little bit weird. And I guess if you're not particularly a fan of their work, possibly. But I don't know what's wrong with you. You don't like the Beatles. I don't know. Luca needs to sort himself out, doesn't he?
Well, he's watching through his head. Samantha also says, "Can you tell us about your involvement in the film Plunder?"
Oh yeah, yes, during lockdown, we got a little bit of funding off the Arts Council because obviously we had to postpone Noir for the 9-month period. And we managed to attract a little small pot of funding to do something with like a lot of arts organisations did. So we ummed and ahed about whether we should do some online panels, something like that. But we thought, a lot of people are already doing them and doing them really well. And we thought maybe we could make a short film essentially. And the festival read that we've chosen for Hull Noir for this year and next year is Plunder by Ted Lewis, which is it's a Hull-set novel. In 1971, he wrote it. And it's been out of print for decades until the last couple of years when Noir put it back out. And it's this kind of like really grubby, nasty blackmail thriller. It's a really, really good novel. And it's well ahead of its time. It's almost like a psychological thriller because it's told through the eyes of two characters who kind of face off each other throughout the novel. And it's a brilliant, brilliant kind of crime story. And we thought, well, what we could maybe do is adapt a passage from that. And we kind of condensed a couple of chapters together, myself and Nick Quantrill, to tell like a little story within the story. And we worked with a couple of artists in the city. We worked with Dave Lee, a filmmaker, and Matt Sutton, who's an actor and a voiceover artist. And we just kind of like filmed some sort of like suggestive scenes around those words. So we went into a pub and sort of filmed that for the backdrop of the passage in the pub. When we went out, I went to Holderness into this kind of like desolate countryside area where in the novel, Plunder's taken this body in the boot of his car to and an abandoned warehouse where the novel starts. So it just became like, we just thought, if we make a short film, we can put it on YouTube and people can see it. And it's something that we can use through to the next festival next March, really. And just kind of, shine a light onto Ted Lewis's work in a different way. Because at the moment, we talk about him a lot. We go to events and talk about him, and a couple of his books are back in print. But a short introduction via film, a 60-minute film where people can hear his words, hear them voiced by an actor, and kind of see the visual behind it, was just a different way of doing it, really. So that's how we decided to spend our money, really. Plus it's good fun to hang around with people making a film as well. It was quite interesting to see the process.
Luca says it's exactly why, so I think it's the Liverpool connection that's
yeah. You're wrong, Luca. You're wrong.
And Samantha says, how did it feel to have Dave Lee adapting Broken Dreams into a short
Yeah,
film?
that was, well, again, it was like Plunder was a short film, really. So it was a very similar process, really. We did that, I think it was about 7 or 8 years ago, where it was funded by the local book festival, Humber Mouth Festival. So yeah, we kind of adapted a couple of scenes from the book and kind of like card jammed them together a little bit to make it work as a short story from within the novel, effectively. And we went and filmed around Hull in various locations and kind of put it together as a backdrop. And that's on YouTube as well. If you go onto the Hull Noir YouTube channel, you can see these films. And it's kind of like a different way of bringing your work to life, I suppose. And it was kind of a little taster, I guess, that if you kind of are fortunate enough as a writer to see your work onto the screen, just kind of how little say you have in it as a writer. You're kind of like you're the last person in the queue to get an opinion almost. When we did Broken Dreams, I said to Dave, the filmmaker, that I would do the reading myself. I would go to the studio and I would record it. And Dave kind of like, people follow Dave Lee on Twitter. You can see he's quite a loud, rash character. He's Dave, very outspoken. And he kind of looked at me, looked like he was going to punch me. And then he ended back down and he said, right, you can go and record a take of the reading for me. And this actor I'm going to hire is going to come do it as well. And we did it, and the actor's take was far, far superior to what I could do. You kind of learn that the professionals in these areas know what they're doing, essentially. And I guess that's the reason why I keep thinking I just want to write novels, essentially. I'm quite happy to let other people I can trust do things like that, essentially. So, yeah, it was kind of a really good kind of thing to work on, these short films. And I think, we're quite keen to do more if we can attract the funding to do that, or kind of find a way of making it happen effectively.
So apart from Hull Noir, what events are you looking forward to going back to when we can travel again?
All of them. I think for me, the big one is always Harrogate, isn't it? We're fortunate both of us out with. I live in Yorkshire, so it's only kind of like a short hop there. But Harrogate is where it's kind of like the industry's AGM, into everybody's there, right? The readers, writers, the industry side of things. It's just a great weekend, isn't it? In a really nice kind of setting, and you get the bonus of seeing some world-class authors talking about their work as well. So, Harrogate's always a great one for me. But yeah, I've been very kind of lucky that I've been able to trot around a few different festivals, and it's always brilliant because you're kind of seeing friends, essentially, aren't you? Whether it's other writers or bloggers or readers, whatever those people are, the people that you form friendships with. And crime writing, I think, is a really kind of strong suit for that. People kind of, there isn't really that divide necessarily, is it, between backstage and front stage in that sense. Everybody's a reader, I suppose, ultimately. Whether you're a writer, you're a reader as well, however you identify yourself. So, any event is a great one to go to, whether I'm going to a kind of like a small library somewhere 2 hours away and talking to half a dozen people, or you're going to Harrogate and you're kind of catching up with everybody. Everything's brilliant. But yeah, any event would be nice at the moment, I think. Any event. But yeah, I've loved it. I've been out twice in Noir to do the festival there, and that was an amazing experience. Something Norwich for Noir, that's a great one. The only big festival I'm not been able to get to so far is bloody Scotland. So maybe 2021 is the year I will get there. As a writer or a reader, one way or another, I will get there.
Yeah, I'd like to go to bloody Scotland. Yeah. Joe Singleton wanted to know if you have a strict writing routine and a place to do it.
I do have a strict writing routine, essentially, because my day is kind of structured around school. Essentially, one of my jobs each day is to get my daughter to school and back, because she's in primary school still. So I guess 9 till about 2:30 is my writing time if I've not got some work on otherwise, or things to do with the festival, that type of thing. So yeah, I invariably spend a lot of time kind of staring at Twitter for a few hours, drinking coffee, and then I start to think, oh, I best actually do some work actually today before my wife comes in, and that's what I've done. So yeah, I think it's kind of handy to have that structure of the school day, really, because it does force me to write in those times. And I like that. I like having that kind of somebody standing over my shoulder, effectively saying, the clock's ticking, you've got to get your coat and shoes on and get to school if you don't get on with it soon. So yeah, I do kind of tend to work in those hours, essentially, plus on a night, generally speaking. But in terms of where I do it, I just tend to sit in my chair in the front room as much as anything, because I lost my study when my daughter was born. So I haven't got a study for writing anymore. I will, because I have a conservatory to use, but that's obviously been a classroom most of this school year with with school closures throughout 2020. So, I guess I'm quite lucky that makes me fairly mobile. I guess I can work wherever I need to work on my laptop, and I'm quite happy sitting in a chair in the front room with the radio on as I'm writing. That keeps me sane, pretty much.
Samantha says staring into space is still work when you're writing.
That's a very good point. Maybe she could explain that to my wife. That sitting there and thinking it actually work. Or if I'm lucky to pick up some sharing work where I need to read the books that the author's written before talking to him. If she comes in from work and I'm lying out on the settee, sprawled out there with a book above my head as I'm reading it, that is working. It's technically working. So I think that's probably a good point there about thinking, because although you're writing when you're at your laptop, a lot of the time when I'm walking around or I'm walking back from school or something, I'm thinking, what am I actually going to do today? What am I going to write about? How do I kind of unknot this problem I've got in my head? So a lot of writing is done away from the laptop, I think. Anyway, essentially, you're kind of always preparing for when you can get on the laptop and do some writing. Or I certainly am.
How do you find the other aspect of it? Because like writing now, I think, is like writing and then marketing yourself as a author. How do you find that side?
Well, I suppose there's different things in there. Like, events. I really like doing events, and when I first had to do that, I can still remember that the first event I did was in Hull Truck, one of the theatres in the city, where they'd come up with this idea that they would print out book covers, me and a number of other authors in the city, and put them on the wall as art, effectively. And as part of that, there was a bit of a launch event where we had to get up and talk and read from our books, and I was very nearly physically sick before I went to go there in front of the microphone. It was such a difficult thing to do and such an unusual thing to do, something I'd never done before. So it was a very steep learning curve in that sense, where now I'm quite happy to kind of get on stage and talk to people I don't know. That's been kind of like a weird journey along with the books, I suppose. But I think, marketing in its broadest sense is something all authors have to do, isn't it, these days? Whether you're self-published or whether you're kind of like the top of the tree, as a brand name, there's always an element you have to do yourself. And I really like social media, which kind of goes against the swimming against the tide a little bit, in some ways, I guess. I really like Twitter in particular, and I found I've got kind of a lot more opportunities through Twitter than I maybe thought I would do. And so I kind of like, I always feel a bit horribly self-conscious when you kind of retweeting things about your own work. But I try and keep it in proportions. I'm talking about other people's work as well, things that I've enjoyed reading, and what other people are doing at the same time. And I think if you do that, then maybe you kind of get some of that karma back as well. I certainly found that when Sound of the Sinners was published, people were willing to spread the word in a way that I didn't really envisage. So, I think you just have to use social media as it is social. It's there to sort of talk with people and engage with people, but not just about yourself. Otherwise, you look like the biggest boy in the room, aren't you, essentially? So, I think it's always a process of trying to get it right when trying to market yourself or in that sense and promote your own self. But I think the more you do it, maybe the better you kind of get a feel of what's right and what's wrong in doing that. But I think a big thing of it is that crime writing is such a big network of people that if you're kind of sharing what other people are doing and what you're enjoying, then I think people kind of respond to that at the same time.
We've got a comment here that just says from Facebook user, and I can't see who it is.
That's worrying.
Do you keep a notebook at the side of your bed? I think for ideas.
I tend to I'm terrible, so I tend to keep my phone at the side of my bed in case I get an idea and I can quickly sort of stick in the memory where, if I had a notepad and pen, I'd have to turn the light on, I suppose, which would cause all sorts of scenes in the bedroom. So, but I do have something just against the bed just in case, because occasionally I do wake up thinking, well, that's a brilliant idea, then half an hour later it's gone. And a lot of the time it's generally a load of nonsense that I've just been dreaming or whatever it might be. But I think that's a good thing about your mobile phone, the notepad on it. It's like I always kind of, when I'm out walking, I'll just be dumping ideas as I go along, possibly, if I don't forget, or maybe something I know I need to change or think about, or just kind of make a note to remind myself. I'm probably more digital in that sense than actually pen and paper, but the principle's the same.
So as the chair of Hull Noir, or like the chair of lots of panels, what are your top tips for someone who's hosting a panel or an author?
I always make sure I have more questions than I need. It's like a security blanket then, isn't it? So because generally speaking, I think for every event I've done, I can't even pick a bad one where the author doesn't want to talk about themselves or the work. People are there to sort of talk about the book title and share with the audience. So, it's invariably it's going to be fine. But I always feel like I need to have more questions than I need, because I know I can just kind of relax a little bit more at that stage. And I think it's just I think it's just reading critically as well when you're reading the book, in terms of that, trying to pick out ideas and themes, and trying to get under the skin of what the author's trying to do with the novel, really. And sometimes as a chair you get it right. You kind of you'll find that the author will agree with you, that you're actually kind of on the same page with that. Other times you might be completely wrong. But that makes it that makes for an interesting discussion as well, because they can then explain kind of the thinking, essentially. It becomes more of a discussion in that sense. So again, it was one of those things where it was absolutely terrifying when I was first asked to interview somebody, because you're thinking, how on earth do you do this? But like writing, the more you do it, hopefully the more skilled you get at it, and you kind of pick up the rhythms for it. And I really enjoy doing it. I would probably say one of my favourite books this year has been Stuart Turton's his new one, The Devil in the Deep Blue Sea. Oh, I'm terrible at book titles.
The Devil in the Dark Water, I think.
That's the one, isn't it? Yeah. And as a reader, I probably would not pick that up for myself to read. But I was asked to interview Stuart for the East Riding Book Festival, and I absolutely loved it. I'll probably say that's probably one of my favourite books of the year. It's like this mad voyage set in the 17th century from Asia to Europe, with all kinds of skullduggery on board as it goes along. And that's kind of like the joy of being asked to chair events, when sometimes you pick up a book that you wouldn't necessarily read and really, really enjoy it. So, I think chairing in that sense as well has brought me, into contact with authors that I wouldn't necessarily read. And that's kind of like the nice thing, really.
Yeah, Chris Speck's North Sea Tale for me.
Exactly, yeah. Chris's book as well, yeah. I mean, I read that one more because obviously that's a whole set novel, and I'm kind of interested. It's almost like, I think as a writer you're a magpie, aren't you? So kind of, if I wanted to write about trawlers in the 70s, Chris has done the research for me. Now I can read his book, steal his information effectively. Evening, Chris, if you're listening, you do send me an invoice now. But yeah, again, because it's a whole set novel, I want to kind of read it. I want to kind of learn a bit more about the city myself. And Chris's book is an excellent book.
Yeah, it's good. And yours, I've enjoyed discovering Joe Garrity.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's very kind. And that's the thing, isn't it, with novels? There might be older novels now to me, but people are discovering them as well for the first time. So, books always have a long sort of shelf life in that sense, don't they? And they're always there. I recently read Shadow Intelligence by Oliver Harris, which I think came out last year. It's like a contemporary spy novel. Really, really enjoyed it. And I kind of looked at the front of it, and he's already written a trilogy of previous novels. So I kind of got all them to go back to and enjoy myself as a reader, which I'm really kind of looking forward to doing.
Are you ever going to be kind to Joe? I feel like he needs a break.
I did an event with Val Wood, who I mentioned earlier, who writes historical sagas, and she says, "Are you ever going to let him have like a happy romance?" And it's like, no, I don't think so, Val. I don't think so. I think a lot of the fun of writing characters, isn't it, is that you want to test them. You want to kind of stress them a bit and see how far they can bend. So, if I make Joe happy, I suppose, in that sense, then that means something bad is coming down the track for him, not be further along in the book. So, I think I'll continue to push him and see kind of how much he can take before he breaks, effectively.
Poor Joe. We've got 2 minutes left. Do you just want to remind everyone of your books and where we can find them?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, this is the latest book, Under the Sinners, which is technically number 4, but it's kind of a jumping in point for the Joe Garrity books because it's the start of a new story cycle. Joe Garrity, Prime Investigator, Hull, lots of bad things, rugby league, fish, that type of thing. No John Prescott in this one. And they're available through the publisher direct, FahrenheitPress.com, all the usual places online. I have a few copies myself. I'm going to use desperate for a signed copy, and they can just get in touch with me through the usual kind of social media website thing. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, Caroline.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome anytime.
Excellent. I'll be back to listen next week.